If you work in IT right now, you're probably feeling the tension, the tug of war between what your systems were built for and what they're being asked to do. With AI adoption accelerating, organizations are now running headfirst into familiar roadblocks. Old legacy systems, hybrid IT questions, and a growing demand for a return on all their modernization efforts to date. So if your CTO is knocking at your door demanding the latest from AI, and you're feeling stuck, I'm glad you found this episode. Today, I sit down with Stu Miniman, Senior Director of Market Insights and Hybrid Platforms at Red Hat, and Andrew Tenaglia, VP of Application Modernization at Converge. Together, we examine the modernization process that paves the way for AI adoption, from the mental roadblocks, slowing transformation, to the architectural must-haves for AI readiness. We explore what it really takes to move forward with purpose, precision, and measurable results. Stu, Andrew, it's good to see you, gentlemen.
Happy to be here.
Great to see you again, Jonathan.
Stu, helping teams navigate hybrid platforms has been your bread and butter for years. Now that you've got this new role at Red Hat, what does your day-to-day look like?
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. So it's hard to believe I've been coming up almost 5 years at Red Hat. I'm a senior director in what we call the Hybrid Platforms business unit. And what does that mean? Hybrid Platforms is the biggest product is OpenShift, but also our virtualization and some of our cloud services that we have there. So, back from when I was an analyst, I was covering cloud and cloud native, and Red Hat had an important role in that. And I meet with a lot of our customers, also help with a lot of our kind of marketing strategy and talk to a lot of the analysts since I'd done that role for a decade. So I love working with customers. It was funny, as an analyst, I'd have to fight to get to talk to customers or bump into them at conferences and this and that. And at Red Hat, I meet pretty regularly, not just at our conferences, but our executive briefing center in Boston, pretty there regularly, and a lot of other ways, because at the end of the day, every customer, they want to know what their peers are doing. And I know we're going to spend a bunch of time talking about AI. Everybody's trying to find out hey, where are people having success? Where are some of the challenges? That's something I've enjoyed doing for my whole career and looking at various technologies. And boy, that's a big wave of AI that we're still in the early stages of.
Andrew, you manage all things modernization here at Converge. What's one outdated trend that you'd love to see our clients leave behind as we move forward?
Look, it's a great job that I get to have, and a lot of conversations like Stu, get to be in front of clients a lot and hear different aspects. So there's maybe not one thing. There's a lot of, as the IT landscape goes, a lot of trends that come and go and things that we address right now. One of the hot topics is support for Java 8, as an example. That's going to be end of support in 2026, right? That's one we're having a lot of conversations with right now. But I would say, to generalize that a little bit, what we're really trying to do as a team and as an organization is help our clients win the race against technical debt, or try to tackle the technical debt that's in front of them, right? That's going to take up a lot of the IT budgets, the keep the lights on, run the business type of aspect of it. Takes up a lot of maintenance costs. It keeps you from doing some of those revenue generating, innovative things that our customers are setting out to do, right? So if we don't tackle those technical debt pieces, and again, that could be different for every organization, whether they're going through a merger or acquisition, whether they have old legacy code and those that built that code are no longer with the organization and there's no documentation out there. Those are problems we're looking to address. But until those things are addressed, it can be a blocker to doing some of those innovative things. And as I know, we'll get into tackling things like artificial intelligence as an example.
Yeah, Jonathan, if I could just chime in on one thing there. It's so tough for the typical enterprise. And they're like, something's running fine. Can't I leave it there? We just announced RHEL 10. So many customers are like, oh, come on, I'm on RHEL 7. I've met with customers that are like, oh my God, I only have 5 years left in my 10-year support contract, and I don't know how I'm ever going to change. As opposed to I live in the Kubernetes world. For the most part, we're releasing 3 times a year. If you're not on something that's in the last year or so, oh my God, you're missing so much activity. So there's that pull between hey, can I just leave it there and let it run for a while? And what I've learned sometimes too is well, what's the application that's running there? Andrew mentioned some of those Java things that are going up. I think about the poor people using those applications. And we're like, oh my God, was this made before mobile existed? Or is it taking advantage of some of these things? So I totally get it. There's certain things that you're like, I don't want to have to upgrade, but you do have to, that legacy debt that Andrew talked about is so important to look at, because there's certain things like, not only is there innovation you can take advantage of, but your ultimate users are going to get more value. You're going to be able to move faster. We'll talk about AI, and hopefully that's going to make us all a little bit more efficient and not just make things harder for us. But yeah, it's a tough topic, and one that we're constantly having with all our companies. And I mean, it's like Red Hat's name was built on giving you like that much longer support for the enterprise compared to what you would just get by using open source.
Yeah, that old "if it ain't broke, don't fix it," right, Stu? That we go up against on the day to day. But not only are you blocked from doing some of the innovative things, but not to introduce fear into the equation, right? But there's security exposures that come into place as well, and that's one of the things that, Jonathan, just my long way of answering your question, we're addressing on the day to day with our team.
It is hard. Change is hard, right? Change is necessary, and organizations have been, like you said, kicking this can down the road for a while now, and with great effect. They've still functioned and had to make small changes, but AI is really a game changer in many different ways. It's really forced organizations to look at what are we doing and how do we integrate this, and that is up against the legacy architecture that they have. They're oftentimes forced with a lot of challenging decisions. As they move forward, Stu, I mean, what do you see from a modern platform stance? What do you see are the biggest challenges for an organization when implementing AI?
Yeah, I mean, let's spend a second, Jonathan, talk about that AI challenge, because this area is changing so fast. Ahead of Red Hat Summit, you're based in New York. I got you to come to the VLLM meetup that we were having in New York City. VLLM is something that I first heard about only a year ago, because the open source project hasn't been around for all that long. And so, in the biggest challenges I've been hearing in AI is like, first of all, it's like, hey, what are those use cases? And then like, when I figure it out, what is the ROI on that? Because, oh my God, those AI accelerators, they're expensive. And am I pulling in data scientists? They are expensive. So there's a lot of expense on this. And many of the customers I've met with in the last year is they say, cool, I figured out how to do something, but compared to the old way I was doing it, I'm not sure that it made financial sense. And what VLLM does is it actually helps me accelerate what I'm doing. I can get better utilization out of my infrastructure, and it structures those models better so that it just makes the financial equation a little bit better. If I can do it faster, if I can use less resources, that's going to make the ROI obviously a little bit better. And since it works with lots of different hardware and all the different models, you've got some flexibility in there, because most customers are still in I haven't figured out the deployment I'm doing. I'm trying lots of different models. I'm trying different hardware solutions, and I need flexibility to be in there. And that ties in with a lot of what we've done at Red Hat. In many ways, it reminds us of what we did with Linux back in the day, moving from Unix to all the hardware. And really, we felt at Red Hat Summit that this is kind of the Linux moment for AI, where VLLM will play an important role in inferencing, and really thinks that that's an important piece of the conversation that customers are having when it comes to AI today.
Yeah. Thinking about this a different way, right? Organizations see the value in the technology. They get a data scientist who can then show how it does have value, right? But when you go to push this into production, just using a bunch of tokens here and there doesn't really add up to a whole lot, right? But once you start running it at scale, using GPUs sitting in the cloud, GPUs sitting on-prem, all of a sudden, the total cost of ownership increases significantly, right? And so suddenly organizations are now faced with the challenge of, is there still ROI? And what you were sharing, Stu, right? Open source projects like VLLM and the open source community that Red Hat is built upon, right, has gone and found ways to optimize these things because the cost is so heavy. I mean, I'll say when we first set up in our lab running a model, It's like, well, this really should only need one GPU. Well, no, actually it needs, the weights of the model, you actually need two GPUs, but actually to run it, you really need four GPUs. Well, that's still just the small model, not the big model. Now, a large model might cost you 8 GPUs, right? But if you can shrink that down to 2 or 4, you cut your compute costs in half. That is absolutely significant. So how are organizations thinking about where they're running these workloads? What have you seen? What challenges have you seen organizations run up against?
Yeah. So from my experience in working at Red Hat, especially if I'm talking to financial service or public sector companies, they're very concerned about their information. So the wonderful thing about LLMs is they have a lot of information. The challenge is they don't have a lot of enterprise information yet. So what we've been working with companies on is how do I actually get my information into the models, do that effectively, do it cost effectively, and how do I do it securely? And a lot of those customers are starting with things where they can really air gap it. I want to put it in my data center. I get a small environment with the AI accelerators that I need, and I train that. We learned a lot from the DeepSeek Open that happened not that long ago. Is it doesn't necessarily have to be the biggest, latest generation of NVIDIA's chips, but it depends what your environment is. So we've been talking about smaller models and trained models because when I talk to the typical enterprise, they don't necessarily need 17th century French history as part of their model. They need things about like their insurance company and all of their policies, or the law firm and all of their case law that they're doing. So how do we do that effectively? And that's what we've been building with our tools. And it's not just about like, hey, we came out with the Granite models not that long ago and they're wonderful, they're open source, but there's a lot of models out there. So I think what you saw at Red Hat Summit is we're really opening the aperture as to what models we're supporting. So our friends at IBM have had a partnership with Meta for a while. So Llama, great, Mistral, some of the other models. We've worked with them for OpenShift AI to be able to make them easy to share. But through the rest of our portfolio, we really want to make sure we've got some choice built into it. So to your point, Andrew, is kind of where it does depend. A lot of those I want to do, keep my information under my control. But when it comes to the overall AI architecture, where I train, I need a lot more resources. Where is the data actually being created? Inferencing a lot more is typically out at the edge and much smaller footprints. Luckily, we're a Linux company. We live a lot of places. And therefore, my product line OpenShift lives everywhere that Red Hat does. The AI tools that we've built on top of those can live in those environments. So trying to get to where the data makes sense, to where the resources make sense. It's a hybrid world, and AI, our friends at AWS actually said that AI is the killer use case for hybrid, and we totally agree with them.
Yeah, you hit on a key piece there, right? You hear a lot about, and I think I saw a stat at some point last year. I think it was a Gartner piece that just with the complexity that you were alluding to in the initial question, Jonathan, right? It's almost like 30%, I think, of AI projects that get abandoned after proof of concepts. How do we really create the business value to push those forward? And Stu, you hit on a lot of those pieces, right? From an operations, the resource requirements for the training, the risk associated with it from security. But that last piece was interesting as far as kind of expanding the partnerships. You guys have that integration piece, right? Integrating with other tools, existing systems. I think that's a key aspect and something certainly to be excited about coming out of Red Hat Summit.
Yeah, I mean, Andrew, to the point, comes to Linux with OpenShift and Ansible. We build a large ecosystem. Part of what we do is it's not just, we work with open source, but we help embrace the community and help bring them into work on this. And oh my gosh, AI, the ecosystem for that makes the cloud native ecosystem look small and stable compared to I hear about new companies. We've made some acquisitions, NeuroMagic and some others in the AI space, and I can't keep up with it. None of us can keep up with just probably what came out while we've just been talking for the past few minutes.
Right, exactly. Last year I was at a Red Hat. You talked about the expanse of the ecosystem, right? I have the fortune of sitting on some of these advisory councils, and it's a diverse group of not only solution providers like ourselves, but the ISP ecosystem in there as well. And I was sitting in one in November last year when you guys made the NeuroMagic acquisition. Actually, it was just kind of fate of timing on that. Can you tell us a little bit more, Stu, about the NeuroMagic acquisition?
So Neural Magic is the number one contributor to the VLLM project that we were talking about. So came out of MIT. They started out as actually, how do I run large language models on CPUs? And their CEO is Brian Stevens, who many of us knew. I first met Brian when he was CTO of Red Hat. Back when I was an analyst, he went to Google Cloud and he pushed the company who was working on VLLM. And he's like, that is the whole business. And it's kind of fascinating. You always say sometimes as a startup is to like, okay, do you pivot? Where do you put your resources? And they were all in on VLLM. And that fits very well with the Red Hat model, is probably open source, heavy contributor to a project, and some really great resources that now is part of our AI business unit at Red Hat.
I will say, right, you touched on, Stu, this idea that there's no one model to rule them all, right? There's different strokes for different folks, and there's different models for different use cases. And we've definitely seen an expansion in how big models go, but also how small do they go, right? And being able to apply the right amount of pressure to a problem when it comes to the model, right? Specialized models are critical. I think it was interesting, right? A year ago, a lot of people were talking about what they need to do to train their large models or tweak large models. But we've definitely seen a significant shift in the space where it's more about which model you're using and then how are you serving it. I mean, when it comes to where AI is going in the future, it is more about agentic systems, right? And the ability for models to work together to solve different problems and have a model that is used to decide which models to use. Are you going to use a function calling model? Are you going to use an image generation model? And so being able to deploy and leverage different models in an enterprise environment is something that is significantly challenging.
Yeah, I mean, Jonathan, it definitely reminds me very much of like microservices architectures. It is not one piece, or how you mentioned functions, how those kind of serverless architectures go. It's definitely not a monolith, and not something where you're just going to stick it in an environment and run for the next decade.
A lot of exciting stuff coming out of Red Hat Summit, right? The VLLM, the kind of, I'll call it the opening them up of the support for different models, really leaning into the true open source. I guess Converge has a story around this in terms of how we're helping clients get started, right? I think that's the blocker we see a lot of times too, is I have these ideas, concept, is it going to provide enough business value for us? We have this notion of design thinking workshops and AI flight paths internally here at Converge. You know, Jonathan, I know your day job outside of being the podcast host for the Edge of IT is living and breathing that every day. But from Red Hat standpoint, again, hopefully you guys can build off the momentum from Red Hat Summit, some of the excitement. But curious how Red Hat's working with clients to really help them with that initial hurdle of where to get started, Stu, if you have any perspective on that.
It was a big focus last year. If you remember Red Hat Summit, in the expo hall, rather than a separate lab, we introduced Instruct Lab, which was how to actually do fine tuning. And half of the people at the show did that. This year at Summit, doing basically the same thing with inference servers. So inference servers and MCP have been kind of the buzz in some of the AI worlds that I've been watching. And therefore, like, how do I get my information into the models and take advantage of that faster? So that's been a big push. And Andrew, it's working with partners like you, because Red Hat, we build the platforms, and we help bring the communities together to share their learnings. And something I always love is at Summit, we have so many customers sharing what they're doing. I've worked for other companies before, technology space. They're like, hey, we built something really cool. And you come back the next year and they're like, yeah, and it's shipping now. And we're like, at Red Hat, it's like, hey, here's what we've got, and here's the community around it, and here's all the things we're already doing with it. So when we went from the last couple of years from the ChatGPT moment, it wasn't just like, it can't just be about like a chatbot and okay, cool, we get a little bit better efficiency. IT is always good at those stories, but like, how are we creating new business models? How are we fundamentally changing some of the things that we're doing? And we really feel we're at that. Those proof points are starting to come out, and we've got more things that we can build on the strength that what the industry's been doing and what our ecosystem's doing around these technologies.
A key piece of that, right, is how are you going to, it's how are you going to do it, but also how are you going to do it, pay for it, and make it economical, right? And I think that's where VLLM has sort of changed the game, right? By using quantized models and optimizing how you're serving them, they've made it so that you need essentially half the compute resources to do the same thing that the standard models are doing. Extremely powerful to be able to bring that together with the MCP paradigm, right? A paradigm that just allows a simple JSON file to allow different services to talk to each other on in a unified way. In many ways, it reminds me of, right, running workloads on Kubernetes, right? Being able to just have a container run and being able to manage all of your workloads from a single place.
It's why, Jonathan, those of us sitting in the OpenShift group are feeling pretty comfortable that as the AI workloads expand, it's the infrastructure we've been building for the last year does that. And we're working the CNCF and the open source communities because some of the things that we did 5 years ago aren't necessarily the architectural underpinnings, but we've got the building blocks. And because just what's stateful, what's stateless, AI, the change and the scale of things is very different than how we used to do things in the past. Observability is something that's been pretty important for the industry as a whole and something that's absolutely critical when we talk about AI. Arvind Krishna, the CEO of IBM, he says, if you haven't adopted the automation and the hybrid cloud architecture, you're not ready for AI. And that's one of the reasons why, Red Hat was before this whole AI moment, but the HashiCorp acquisition by our friends at IBM is not an AI acquisition, but it absolutely helps with the underpinnings of what you need to be able to take advantage of AI.
So far, one thing's obvious. AI doesn't thrive in a vacuum. It needs an infrastructure that's not just stable, but also adaptable, cost-effective, and secure. We've talked about why cost matters, why smaller, purpose-built models are gaining traction, and why open source tools like VLLM are helping teams get more done with less. But even the smartest models won't deliver if it's running on infrastructure that's stuck in 2010. Because here's the thing, AI performance is directly tied to IT performance. If your systems are slow, siloed, or stitched together with temporary fixes, you're not just delaying outcomes. More likely, you're increasing risk, creating inefficiencies, and making it harder for teams to scale AI. Now, let's shift gears and take a closer look at modernization and migration. What does it really take to move from legacy environments to something that's built for the future? And maybe more importantly, how to manage the culture shifts that come with it. Because modernization isn't just about new tech, it's about new ways of working, building, and thinking. Modernization, right, is so critical. We've gone from running on 30 years ago, running on bare metal machines and managing server racks to having virtual machines. But as we were talking earlier, as we're prepping for this, switching the paradigm around is what, in many ways, what Red Hat did 5 years ago was kind of ahead of the curve, wasn't it, Stu?
I've got a long history with virtual machines. It was an important part of my career, but I dove pretty heavily into the cloud native architecture. And what brought me to Red Hat was to work on this transition in the industry. And to your point, and we kind of talked around it, but not to it specifically, AI, I need these new architectures. I need the new ways of doing things. That does not mean that everything from the past goes away. You asked Andrew at the start, like, what can we get rid of? It's like, hey, look, in IT, almost nothing ever dies. I can still talk about how mainframe fits into all of the environments that I can run Linux, I can run containers, I can run AI on a mainframe. That's fine. But virtual machines are definitely going through a change. First of all, for the architecture that we talked about for AI, I need to do it. And secondly, there has been that forcing function for a lot of companies to reconsider what they're doing when Broadcom acquired VMware. So it's one of those things that we've really found over the last year or so. Those conversations can go together, but often it's different groups because the administrators for that old system aren't the ones that are being asked about AI. But if you go up to the senior level, the architects or the C-suite, you're being asked to do these new things and you have concerns around the budget around the old things. And if I don't adopt the modernization, I could be in a real bind. As Andrew said, we've been doing this modernization discussion for a while. OpenShift's 10 years old now. So the customers we found that had already started on that journey are in much better shape, but there's a lot of work to be done because modernizing moving from virtualization to cloud native with containerization and Kubernetes is not something that happens overnight.
We've definitely had a lot of conversations, and I'm sure Andrew's got stories for days about how organizations just feel that making that change is just so risky, right? But I mean, should they be scared that this is just going to be a money pit and that there's just too much at stake?
Look, we talked about it at the onset of the conversation, right? It's that if it ain't broke, don't fix it type of thing. There's that apprehension to move forward and kind of I'll call it apprehension to go forth with some new opportunities there. Stu, you and I sat together a year ago in Denver and talked about the opportunity in front of us with virtualization and how we could help address that. And yes, there's that apprehension that's out there, but between Red Hat and Converge and other partners in the ecosystem, we've done a lot over the past year, right? Red Hat, again, we'll expound hopefully, Stu, on some of the announcements coming out of Summit from a virtualization standpoint. But I think a really strong move at the beginning of this year was rolling out OpenShift Virtual OVE, right? As an example, and just some of the solutions, the enablement you guys have provided to the partners in the field, building off some of our expertise as a longtime VMware partner as well. Helping clients address some of that apprehension. We have things like assessments that we have in place to help clients go through that, minimize some of that risk, build out the plan. Red Hat has rolled out their virtualization toolkit as well, and we found that helpful as we've kind of built out our migration factory here internally to help clients actually assess the workload down to the application level as well, but then build out that factory leveraging some of the IP that Red Hat has made available to some of the partner communities. So maybe you could touch on the virtualization toolkit and kind of what we're doing from a VMA standpoint a little bit.
Sure. And Andrew, let's start with, is there apprehension? Look, virtual machines run the critical applications that customers have. It has always been, it's about risk. Look, you can save me some dollars, you get a pat on the back. My applications go down, you could be out of a job and we could all be out of a job. So that's always been a concern. Heck, but Jonathan, we know change is always there. It was funny, I saw a thing online and they said, hey, how about AI? How excited are you and how worried are you? And it was like, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm a 10 excited. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'm 11 worried. That's typical for a lot of change. So making a change, look, Converge and Red Hat, our relationship with our customers is built on trust. We are not going to say like, hey, we're going to move your stuff and we're not sure how it's going to work. The migration assessment Andrew talked about is to give you that comfort. We do an assessment, we look at all of your applications, and you come out with like a green, yellow, red. Green is you're good to go. Yellow, you need to make some adjustments. Red are like, hey, we're going to need to do some re-architecture. And you get a timeline and you get a price. And you say, and this is what it's going to look like. I worked in the storage industry for a while. Migration was a 4-letter word when I worked in the storage industry. Even if you stayed in the same company, moving from one thing to another, migrations are not simple. It's like 80% of the way I can get there. The last mile is always tough. So we've worked with a lot of customers. I was so excited at Red Hat Summit. We had so many customers, main stage, breakouts, panels, sharing with their peers, roundtables about where we are. Because first of all, from a technology standpoint, Andrew, from a year ago to now, the storage configurations are better. The performance is better. The data recovery and backup solutions, much more of them are now certified. So some of the blockers that we had, even like on the networking side, like multi-tenant networking to look much more like VMware, was released in the last 6 months. So some of those things, if you looked at this solution a year ago and said like, oh, it's not ready, it's like, well, we had customers that were using it, but maybe it wasn't ready for your configuration or you had something that was blocked. Most of those major blockers we've gotten rid of, and we've got a robust roadmap that we share. You can go look on YouTube and see the slides and the videos where we are for the next 12 or 18 months. And if there's a feature that you need that's not quite there yet, maybe you can get a early access version of that or be able to see where it's going to hit the roadmap. And most of these migrations, they're going to take a year or two. Typical, I mean, I know I've talked with you, Andrew, about this. Most customers signed a 3-year renewal, and it's not like, oh, hey, let's think about this in 3 years. It's like, okay, let's take this year to figure out what we're doing, because then I will have that 2 years to be able to do a smart, safe migration to get me where I need to be. So I could talk about this all day. Gosh, at Summit, I think I did talk about it for days because it's an important topic. A lot of customers are sorting through it. And the good news is we've made a ton of progress. A lot of people are sharing what they've done. And we all want to be able to talk and help you through this hurdle, because if you don't get through that hurdle, what you don't want is that anchor holding you back to be able to say, oh, hey, I saw some really cool new stuff, but I don't have the budget, or my people are tied down to doing things the old way, and now I can't take advantage of the cool AI stuff.
Yeah, no, it's come a long way. And again, we could talk about it a lot because it's a conversation we have every day with our clients. And what you alluded to there is what we're seeing play out in reality, where there is maybe a 3-year renewal that takes place, but our clients are looking at, all right, what are those specific workloads we can look at in the short term, do some sort of MVP project to prove out the point that maybe this is an alternative for me down the road. And I think when we were sitting maybe a year ago, Stu, it was, all right, if I do this, am I just getting functionality that's just as good as I have today? Is this worth the squeeze? I think there's also some newer features that can come into play as well. Yeah, I know you've alluded to in various settings when we talked at Red Hat Summit as well, things around GitOps and configuration drift, minimizing that. But it also presents the opportunity not to just migrate, but to modernize it at our client's pace. I think that was an important change from where we were a year ago at Red Hat Summit, where it was, here's your option with OpenShift container platform. Now we have essentially, if you look at it, right, with OVE, that's the migrate me now button, right, if you will. And then with OKE and introducing some of the automation features, you have kind of migrate me plus, if you will, right, with some new enhanced features. But I'm getting the ability down the road to migrate to modernize and have all of those features and functionalities from an OpenShift container platform as I do modernize those workloads. So you've given customers choice, essentially, in terms of how they approach that journey, which I think was an important development over the past year from summit to summit.
So in the last year or so, Andrew, can you think of an example, a story of how one of our clients that you worked with went into this with trepidation and came out with seeing the value, understanding the value, and feeling as if they were in a better position?
Yeah, I mean, we've worked with a lot of clients over the past couple of years going down that path, and typically we like to start, and we have we've invested heavily in our lab environments, right? With investments on our part, with our partners like Red Hat providing some of the technology for us to kind of build out these environments and prove that out, that this is a viable alternative for our clients, and it has gotten a lot closer, as Stu alluded to the look and feel that a VMware admin was used to for those last 15, 20 years. So we typically take an approach where there's a demo capability that we have available to us. And then really, again, there's that virtual migration assessment phase where we've helped clients look at the application level, provide that green, yellow, red that Stu alluded to, and then start tackling some of the use cases, right, in a prioritized manner. And that's something that we're invested in. We're part of the Partner Practice Accelerator program with Red Hat. I think it's a select few, maybe 15 to 20 partners across North America at this point, Stu, where I had the pleasure of meeting with a lot of those peers of mine at other organizations. And when we sat a year ago, we all saw the opportunity in front of us to be helping our clients along this journey, but no one was really ready to jump at it yet. This past summit, stories changed. There's a lot of success stories where we've helped successfully identify, assess, provide that roadmap and plan and start moving workloads. So as far as pinpointing one client, Jonathan, there's been many on that front this year.
Just one thing I want to highlight too is we talk about the open source projects or the general maturity of things. the ecosystem announcements that we had at the show really highlight where things have gone with virtualization. So Amazon was the first one that we had a virtualization offering with OpenShift on. They have a pretty mature bare metal solution, but we really opened the aperture we've now got a public preview with what we are Azure Red Hat OpenShift offering that we have virtualization on there. And we have a technical preview on both Google Cloud and Oracle Cloud. So checking the box on to make sure that you said, hey, if I want to do this in the public cloud, we've got all the major clouds there. And like Amazon has a number of programs to actually even pay you for migration. So whether you were running like VMware Cloud on AWS or you want to go from the data center to the cloud, because some people are like, hey, can't I just run this in the cloud? And it's like, well, yes, but do I want to run it similar to how I was doing VMware, which our OpenShift virtualization will do? Or are you ready to go in truly with the native cloud services? So we give you some options there. And also in the data center, updates with what we're doing with our good partners of Dell, who had Dell Technology World the same week as Summit, and some of our other hardware providers. We've been updating the architectures, the reference architectures, to make sure that if you have a solution, we're hopefully not needing you to change too much of what you're doing, because we understand how refresh cycles go and the overall education. And you want to, if you're making a change, you don't want to be like, oh, okay, I need to change all of these things. Let's take it in chunks, as Andrew pointed out. If you want to do like a V2V today and look at modernization in the future, absolutely we can do that. If you're already using some of the more modern stuff, we can accelerate some of those things that you're doing. And you're right in the thick of this at Converge to help customers through those various conversations. But at the end of the day, all of our things is you've got choice.
Yeah, and I'm glad you called out the hyperscalers role in this as well, right? And it kind of brings me back to, again, a few years ago, we've obtained as an AWS advanced consulting partner, our migration competency. And this was something we had to prove out to AWS as well to obtain that certification, is our ability to, again, do what we just talked about, that assess to migrate and taking advantage of some of the funding programs out there. That's something that we've been doing for a number of years. And we've taken a lot of those lessons learned and really built them into this migration factory from a virtualization opportunity here. So I'm glad you tied it back to the hyperscalers as well, Stu.
I mean, what are some of the key indicators of success for a migration?
That the workloads are continuing to run as they were before, as Stu alluded to. You make these changes and the system goes down, we got a big problem, right? So, I mean, the key indicator is the performance.
It simplifies day two operations then, right? That workloads stay up. It costs less to run the workloads, easier to manage the workloads.
Yeah, I mean, Jonathan, absolutely. So that's one of the things that's a little different is many of the virtualization alternatives that are out there is you're really doing a V2V. And the best case you've got is something that is hopefully meeting kind of what you had before. The promise of what we're doing is we're bringing things into a much modern architecture. Andrew mentioned like GitOps is one of the key features I've talked to like every customer about, because drift has always been a concern in IT. And if I can leverage something like GitOps that helps me maintain that, the code of truth, and keeps me on that version through automation, that's goodness. So I want to be more up to date on versions. Andrew had mentioned for like security reasons, right? My new environment should be easier to manage, more automated and more secure. And absolutely, that's what Red Hat and its ecosystem partners are all working at.
And the other indicator there, of course, right? I was kind of, being cute a little bit with the performance piece, right? Of course, and those applications still running. But part of the reasons they're looking at making this move is cost savings, right? So that's something that we're trying to, again, as far as that evaluation phase, making sure that there's a business value assessment as part of that. So we understand the total cost of ownership at the end of that migration as well. And that would certainly be a success criteria that we would look at upon completion, Jonathan.
So if you could leave IT leaders with one piece of advice as they are considering diving into AI while also still having this legacy infrastructure that they're dragging with them, what would you share with them? What would you tell them to focus on?
I'll start and let Stu wrap up. I'll start. I'll end where I started at the beginning here. Right, is tackling that technical debt piece. Right, that's what my team is focused on the day to day, and I'm a true believer in that. If we are going to go after some of these innovative, newer technologies like artificial intelligence that we spend a lot of time on, we have to tackle the technical debt that's in front of us. And I think there's a Gartner study out there that 57% of CIOs feel as though they don't manage technical debt appropriately. That's something that our team is doing on the day to day. And there's a lot of different entry points to that. As I said before, there could be a merger and acquisition. There could be outdated code that has potential security exposures, or outdated code that the folks who built that technology is no longer there, and there's a lack of documentation. These are all areas that we can help address. And I think it's key to get started and really essentially build that foundation and free up some of that budget to go after some of these innovative revenue generating ideas that we've touched on here. So Stu, I'll turn it to you for your thoughts to close us out and bring us home.
Yeah, so I think you had some great points there. We talked about I'm worried it's the risk. When you talk about your employees, everybody's like, oh my gosh, are these technologies going to put me out of a job? At the end of the day, we usually find like, hey, if we can get rid of some of the toil that you're working on and allow you to grow your career and move forward, most people want that. AI, it's scary, but it's an opportunity for us too. And it's one of those things that it doesn't just touch those of us that are in IT. AI is one of those technologies I talk about with friends and family. I didn't talk to them about virtualization or even much about cloud computing, but AI is something that we're all figuring out where it fits, what the impact is going to be on jobs, and what we're doing. So talk to your people, pull them all involved in them, give them the understanding that, hey, here's your role going forward. And like Jonathan, when we talked about the virtualization thing, we can in very short time help a virtualization admin to understand how they would do things in the new world. AI, some things take a little bit longer. When you and I went to that VLLM meeting, there's certain pieces of it I totally understood, and other pieces I'm like, wow, that's just way down in the weeds and stuff that I, as somebody with a heavy infrastructure background, am not close to. But I've been learning and diving in and figuring out where things make sense, and it's exciting. So if you engage your people and make sure they've got a seat at the table and understand where things are going, it's going to make things smoother. We all know if it's just a top-down, thou shalt do this, you're going to run into barriers and people will be fighting against you. So make sure that people have buy-in and they can participate in the change. And then usually things are going to go a little bit easier.
At least for me, right, what's becoming more and more clear is that the amount of compute we need is not going down, it's only going up, right? And it's never, ever going to go down. It's going to become more efficient and it's going to increase. And so, therefore, our modern platforms absolutely must make it easier to manage compute as it continues to grow. Legacy ways of doing this was hands-on keyboard monitoring and managing server upon server upon server. We have to abstract it, right? We've got to be in a place where it is easier to manage mountains of compute. And I think people are just afraid of letting go and letting a platform manage it. It's exciting to see what Red Hat is doing to get us there, right?
Jonathan, if you're familiar on the energy side, it's Jevons paradox that if you make something more energy efficient, you will actually use more energy. I did operations work for part of my career, and the team I always managed was like, you know that next quarter, next year, you're always going to have more work to do. So if you don't automate and get rid of certain things, you will burn out. So we need to be able to figure that. And you're totally right. I'd always said like, hey, figure out what your platforms can do, figure out what you can automate away, and where do we add value as, the technology people, as the person involved. You need to understand that value chain. AI is definitely changing things, but it's not changing the laws of physics. So there's still a lot that the people need to do, and that the platforms become even more important.
Andrew, thank you for joining us today. Stu.
Hey, great to be here. Great to see you as always, Jonathan, Stu. Great to spend time with you at Red Hat Summit. And I know we have our AI roadshows coming up over the course of the next few months. So see you guys soon. Appreciate the opportunity, Jonathan.
Exciting stuff. Thanks so much.
It was a privilege getting to pick both Stu and Andrew's brains on what it really takes to build a future-ready IT environment. Whether it's tackling technical debt, rethinking virtualization, or using AI as the catalyst for broader transformation. These aren't just concepts to consider, they're decisions that need action right now. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Edge of IT. I hope it sparked a few ideas on how to better prepare your teams for what's next. For more, visit us at convergetp.com, and don't forget to subscribe to Edge of IT on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you get your favorite shows.